Wales has houses still standing from before the printing press was invented. People live in them, they pay council tax, they deal with damp, they argue with listed building officers about replacing windows. This is not about preservation. It is not about heritage tourism. It is not about carefully maintained museum villages where volunteers in period costume demonstrate 15th century baking techniques. This is about someone microwaving dinner in a kitchen attached to a hall built in 1436, about a pub serving lager in a room with dendrochronology-dated timbers from the winter Henry Tudor took the throne. About morning routines happening inside walls that were already 300 years old when the Industrial Revolution began, while England knocked down its medieval town centres to build Georgian prosperity. Wales kept its ancient architecture through an accident of poverty, conquest, and borders nobody could agree on. The result is towns where the street grid hasn't changed since Edward I drew it up as an occupation plan, where farmhouses mentioned in 15th century poems are still working farms, where legal ambiguity lasting 4 centuries meant nobody could agree whose job it was to demolish anything. These are not the oldest buildings in Britain, but they might be the oldest ones where ordinary life continues without interpretive plaques. 1. Conwy's medieval walls are the most complete in Britain. You can walk their entire circuit, 1,280 meters of stone, and you are walking on the exact surface that enclosed the town in 1283. The walls were built by Edward I as part of his Iron Ring of castles designed to control Wales after conquest. They worked. Inside those walls sits Aberconwy House, built around 1420. It is the oldest recorded dwelling in Wales. It has been a merchant's house, a bakery, a hotel, an antique shop, and now operates as a historic house. Across 6 centuries, it was never demolished. The building simply moved through functions, commercial, residential, commercial again, without anyone deciding it needed to be replaced. The walls are why. Conwy was a planned colonial town, laid out to an English grid pattern, enclosed by fortifications that made expansion impossible. The medieval street plan couldn't sprawl, so it couldn't be erased. While English market towns grew outward and replaced their centres with Victorian redevelopment, Conwy stayed constrained inside its 13th century perimeter. The architecture of occupation became its own preservation mechanism. This is not Welsh heritage. This is English military planning that succeeded so thoroughly it became permanent. The town was built to keep the Welsh out of what had been Welsh territory. It kept its form because the people who built it understood that walls define everything inside them. Walk Conwy streets today, and you are walking the occupier's blueprint. The grid is Edward's grid. The plots are the plots his planners marked out for English burgesses. Aberconwy House was built by the merchant class that moved in after conquest, wealthy traders who could afford stone ground floors and timber-framed upper stories. It has survived through continuous use. That is the pattern. Buildings that remain useful remain standing. 2. Ruthin was rebuilt in the 1430s. The town had burned during Owain Glyndŵr's rebellion, a 15-year uprising that tore through Wales between 1400 and 1415. When the rebellion collapsed, English forces and their Welsh allies reconstructed what had been destroyed. Nantclwyd y Dre, dated to 1435, is one of those rebuilds. It is the oldest timber-framed townhouse in Wales. It stands as physical evidence of who won. Rose Cottage is older in form, a cruck-framed hall house, medieval in structure, but it too carries modifications from the century after Glyndŵr. Its chimney was added in the 1600s. Before that, smoke rose through the hall from a central hearth and escaped through gaps in the roof. The chimney was progress, it was technology. It kept heat in and smoke out, and it marked the house as current. Rose Cottage is still privately owned. Someone lives there. Nantclwyd y Dre is now a museum. Both survived, but their survival took different forms. The museum froze in curatorial time. The home kept adapting, chimneys, windows, wiring, plumbing, because occupation requires compromise. Listed building consent limits what owners can change, but it cannot stop entropy. If you do not heat a 15th century hall, moisture wins. If you do not replace failed timbers, the frame sags. The question is not whether you intervene. The question is how much intervention erases what you are trying to keep. Ruthin's architecture is post-conflict reconstruction. These are not buildings that survived the rebellion. They are buildings that replaced what burned. The rebellion's legacy is not in what endured, it is in what had to be rebuilt and who did the rebuilding. 3. The Tudor Rose in Beaumaris has timbers that were cut in the winter of 1485 to 86, not around 1485, not late 15th century. The winter of 1485 to 86, confirmed by dendrochronology, tree ring dating that reads growth patterns like text. Henry Tudor took the English throne in August 1485 at Bosworth. By winter, someone in Beaumaris was felling trees to frame a building. Whether this was coincidence or commemoration, the timbers do not say. They say only when the tree stopped growing. The Georgian Dragon, another Beaumaris building, has a painted bleeding heart on an interior truss beam. The paint dates to around 1610. It is a devotional symbol, the Sacred Heart, a counter-Reformation Catholic image in a country that had been officially Protestant for 70 years by then. Most customers walking beneath it today do not look up. Beaumaris was Edward I's last and most sophisticated Welsh castle town, founded in 1295. The street plan was colonial, plotted for English settlers, structured around a market square and castle. The architecture reflects that. Stone ground floors for security and status, timber-framed upper stories in English vernacular styles. The Tudor Rose's dendrochronology does what folklore cannot. Legends say a building is old. Oral history estimates. Even property records can be ambiguous or lost. Tree rings are annual records written in cellulose. They register every growing season, wet years, dry years, cold springs. When you match a timber's ring pattern to the master chronology for the region, you are reading a date the tree itself recorded. The timber was felled in winter because that is when you felled timber, when sap was down, when wood was most stable. The frame went up shortly after. By the time Henry VII was consolidating power, this building existed. It still exists, still serves drinks. The science is definitive, the building is not. 4. The Black Lion in Hay-on-Wye has sections from the 1300s. The building sits in the town that received its market charter in 1237, right on the border between Wales and England. That border is why it survived. Hay was too Welsh for English redevelopment money and too English for Welsh. It sat in the March, the disputed zone where neither kingdom's authority was absolute. Marcher lords held ambiguous power. Investment required certainty. Hay offered none. The result was architectural stasis. When Victorian prosperity rebuilt English market towns and Welsh industrial valleys poured money into chapels and civic buildings, Hay remained a border crossing that neither side claimed strongly enough to transform. The medieval street pattern stayed because no one had sufficient reason or jurisdiction to change it. Now Hay is internationally famous as a book town, an identity invented in the 1960s when Richard Booth began opening second-hand bookshops in empty buildings. The books are the brand, but they are surface. The medieval stone underneath is accidental, preserved not through intention, but through centuries of being too disputed to matter. The Black Lion kept serving travelers because the border made it necessary. People crossed. They needed food, drink, beds. The building remained useful, regardless of which kingdom claimed the territory that week. Continuous function meant continuous maintenance. Useful buildings get repaired. Abandoned ones collapse. Hay survived because nobody could agree whose job it was to knock it down. 5. Bryndraenog sits on a working farm near Begildy. It was built in 1436. Dendrochronology confirms the timbers. A 15th century Welsh poet called it Proud Maiden of Lime and Timber. The poem survives. So does the house. This is one of the only buildings in Wales with its own medieval verse. Poetry was how status was recorded when you could not commission portraits or print books. A poet praising your house meant the house mattered. Bryndraenog mattered in 1436. It is grade 1 listed now, which means it still matters, but for different reasons. It has never stopped being a farm. While English manor houses became national trust properties with gift shops and tea rooms, Bryn Draenog just continued. Same land, same use, different centuries. The question is why here? Why was a hall house significant enough to warrant poetic documentation built in rural Powys, far from any major settlement or trade route? The answer is probably wool. 15th century Welsh wealth came from sheep, and upland farms controlled grazing. Status followed economics. The house was a statement in timber and lime render. Now someone farms there. They live inside the statement. 6. Penllyn Fawr in Pool Healy has no exact construction date. It predates 1700, likely mid-16th century, but records do not pin it down further. What is certain is that it has been serving drinks for over 400 years and never stopped. It sits on a working high street. Modern shop fronts surround it. Traffic passes. The contrast is stark. 21st century Pewell Healy built around a building that was already old when the Stuarts took the throne. Most medieval buildings survived by becoming museums. Roped off rooms, interpretive panels, controlled access. Penllyn Fawr survived by remaining commercially useful. Inns need customers. Customers need inns. The function never expired. This is preservation through economics, not sentiment. Useful buildings get maintained because maintenance protects income. When the roof leaks, you fix it, not to preserve heritage, but to keep serving pints. The heritage is a byproduct. The building has been modified. It has to have been. Plumbing, electricity, fire safety. Modern licensing requirements do not care that your timbers predate Shakespeare, but the frame remains. The footprint remains. The fact of its continuous operation remains. Penllyn Fawr proves that functional buildings outlive pretty ones. Beauty invites demolition and replacement. Utility invites repair. 7. Teiggwyn stands on Barmouth's waterfront. The name means White House. Local legend says Jasper Tudor sheltered here before the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, hiding from Yorkist forces before escaping to Brittany with his nephew Henry, the future Henry VII. The legend might be false. Jasper Tudor's movements in 1485 are documented, but not every safe house is recorded. What matters is that the story needed a building to stick to, and Teiggwyn provided one. The house itself is genuine 15th century. KW confirms the date. Whether Jasper Tudor slept there is a different question than whether someone in the 1400s built it. Legends require physical anchors. Without buildings, stories evaporate into folklore. Teiggwyn has been collecting narratives for 500 years because it remains visible, because the street pattern around it barely changed, because most coastal medieval architecture disappeared centuries ago to storms and redevelopment, and this did not. The residential buildings near it follow old property boundaries. The waterfront was strategic, escape routes by sea, trade access, defensibility. That is why someone built substantially here in the 15th century. That is why it mattered enough to survive. Whether Jasper Tudor hid here is less important than this. Someone thought a house on this spot was worth building in stone and timber during the Wars of the Roses, and that house is still standing. 8. Llanidloes has a half-timbered market hall built in 1612. It is one of only a few surviving in Wales. Medieval origin houses surround it, still residential, still inhabited. The town's population today is around 2,500. It has always been small. That smallness saved it. Victorian developers built railways and factories where profit existed. They tore down medieval centres in towns that mattered economically, places growing, industrialising, generating capital. Llanidloes had none of that. Too remote, too small, too poor. The Victorians went elsewhere. Being overlooked became a preservation strategy. The market hall stayed because no one needed the land badly enough to clear it. The houses stayed because wholesale redevelopment required investment no one was willing to make. Neglect is not romantic, but it works. The market hall anchored everything around it. Once it survived into the 20th century, the surrounding buildings gained context. A medieval street grid with one surviving centerpiece makes sense. Demolish the centerpiece and the rest becomes clearance ready. The hall gave the town a reason to stay intact. Now that underdevelopment is an asset. Heritage tourism. architectural significance. The same poverty that prevented Victorian redevelopment now attracts visitors who pay to see what poverty accidentally preserved. The irony is total. 9. Plas Owain is a mid-16th century timber-framed house on a farm road in Caerzus. It is Grade 2 star listed, which means nationally important. Someone lives there anyway. The building is a seven-valley house, a vernacular type found almost nowhere else. The timber framing pattern, the layout, the construction details are specific to maybe a 20-mile radius along the Severn Valley. If you see this style, you are here. Nowhere else. This is architecture as dialect. Regional building traditions existed everywhere once, but most were erased by pattern books, mass production, national styles. The Severn Valley house survived in fragments because the valley was remote enough that local methods persisted into the 16th century, then stopped. What remains now is architectural DNA, buildings that tell you exactly where they are from because they could not have been built anywhere else. Plas Owain sits on working farmland. The land use has not changed since the house was built. Farming required a house. The house enabled farming. The cycle continued for 5 centuries without major disruption. The listing protects it. Grade 2 star status means consent is required for alterations, but protection does not mean preservation is easy. Someone still pays for roof repairs, replaces failed timbers, manages damp in walls built before damp-proof courses existed. The house is not a museum. It is someone's problem and someone's home. This is hyper-local history, not national narrative, not grand events, but the specific way people in one valley built their farms in the 1500s. That specificity survived. Barely. 10. Little Pit Cottage in Larnarth is mid-16th century timber-framed. Caddy W calls it exceptionally intact. Part of that intactness comes from administrative confusion lasting 439 years. Monmouthshire was not legally part of Wales or England from 1535 to 1974. The laws in Wales, Acts of 1535 to 1542, brought Wales under English law but left Monmouthshire's status ambiguous. It was administered with England for some purposes, with Wales for others, and sometimes separately. Court circuits treated it differently than counties. Maps disagreed on where to place it. The result was jurisdictional limbo. Legal ambiguity discourages investment. If you cannot be certain which administrative structure governs planning, taxation, or development rights, you do not redevelop. You maintain what exists and wait for clarity. Clarity did not come for 4 centuries. That limbo preserved buildings like Little Pit Cottage. It was neither English enough for Georgian improvement money nor Welsh enough for Victorian industrial redevelopment. It sat in the gap between both. Nobody could definitively say whose responsibility it was to modernise the county, so modernisation moved slowly. Monmouthshire was formally assigned to Wales in 1974 under local government reorganisation. By then, its ambiguous buildings had survived long enough to become listed heritage. The same confusion that kept them unremarkable for 400 years now makes them significant. Little Pit Cottage is still privately inhabited. Someone lives with exceptional intactness and the maintenance burden that comes with it. The house survived because it was too legally unclear to knock down. These buildings did not survive because Wales treasured them. They survived because Wales could not afford to replace them. Poverty is not a preservation strategy anyone recommends, but it works better than intention most of the time. England had money. Money meant development. Development meant demolition. Georgian terraces replaced medieval timber. Victorian civic pride rebuilt town centres in stone and iron. Prosperity erased the past because the past was inconvenient and outdated and in the way. Wales had remoteness, disputed borders, legal ambiguity, towns too small to matter, farms that kept working the same land with the same buildings because changing either one required capital no one had. The result was accidental time capsules, not preserved through policy, but through being overlooked. Now someone is trying to heat a crock frame with a condensing boiler. Someone else is arguing with planning officers about replacing failed windows in a Grade 1 listed hall house while rain, comes through the roof. Another person is serving lager in a room with timbers dendrochronology-dated to 1485, unaware that the building is older than their country's Reformation. This is not heritage tourism. This is ordinary life happening inside extraordinary duration. The walls predate the Tudors. The electric bill is due next week. Both are true. Wales kept what England destroyed, not through virtue, but through circumstances that made destruction unaffordable or jurisdictionally unclear. That accident is now an asset, but the people living in these houses are not curators. They are trying to stop damp, fix heating, meet building regulations written for structures that assume plumbing and foundations and walls that are not 600 years old. History is not something you visit on weekends in Wales, it is where you pay council tax.